Hello and welcome to another advanced building tips and tricks for your bases in Infinity Siege. Spent a lot of time mucking around with the builder now, and if you've watched any of the other videos, we've been checking out some of the other bases and I've been learning so much. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive in all the things that I've learned through the building process and through looking at other people's builds. There'll be something for you in this video, I'm sure of it, and we're going to look at things in quite a lot of detail. So stick with me on this, and if you get anything out of this, please consider liking, subscribing. Really goes a long way. Thanks very much for coming along on the journey. Let's get into it. The first thing I want to cover is this amazing trick you may know or you may have not seen. It's by far one of the most useful glitches currently in the game that allows for complete freedom in building expression because you can defeat the rule of overlapping or collision by using this trick. So I'll just give a quick example of it. We'll jump into an empty slate. So for this example, we're just going to use the Hellfire turrets, and if you've ever used these end-game turrets or when you get up to them, you'll notice that they take up a ridiculous amount of space. See where that yellow pin is? And that's what causes so many issues. Its legs kind of extend further than what they do visually. It's almost like one extra spacing over. That's why a lot of the time you can't really attach them like right on the edge. But if you see in this example, we've placed down one Hellfire turret. Now we're going to place down the second one. Now it's important that when you want to do this trick, place the turret down. So you place down your second turret, wall, whatever it is you want to get overlapped. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up and then we're going to lock it into place with where exactly we want it. And this is where the collision rule will get overwritten. So we can take our hand off the mouse if we want to now, because we want to keep it exactly where it is, where we want to lock it. And all we're going to do is we're going to press X to delete it. So X to delete, it's gone. And then all we need to do now, without touching the mouse or moving our mouse at all, we're going to hit Control Z. Going to take any object that had a collision issue and put it exactly where it was before you deleted it. So it's like kind of what is happening, to explain this in like layman's term, which is basically all I can do, not a coder. But what's sort of happening here is basically taking wherever it was in its last place as an actual valid placement, even though it's not. And because it's snapping onto the blocks, it's like, yep, this is an actual valid snap. It is in collision, but it's still a valid placement. But by hitting X and then going Control Z, it's like, oh yeah, that was a correct spot it snapped to. And then it's not doing like any almost collision check again when you go and undo the delete. The important thing is to understand the steps. We'll just go over this one more time just to give another example, just so it really drives home. So step one is place the first object. Step two is place the second object down. Then pick up the object that you want to move into place. Lock it in, don't move the mouse. Hit X, then Control Z. That will bring it back into place and it'll be a valid task. Now, some huge disclaimers to using this. This will be fixed on point. So I highly recommend you do not use this exploit throughout your whole base unless you really don't care, because at some point you will have to come back and replace everything and completely restructure your base, because this rule will cause errors when you try to use it. However, right now you can use this trick, but from some discussions on Discord, there are limitations on how many times you could use this, or it starts to cause problems in your save. And by problems, I mean it may finally go, hang on, you shouldn't be able to do this, and then cause all of them to error, and then you'd go have to redo it all again and then save the file. But again, it can be very risky, but for the most part, you've seen a lot of the builds that we've looked at where it's used quite often and hasn't caused too many problems. So you're gonna have to use this completely at your own discretion, but just be mindful it will most likely bite you in the butt later, because they will fix this. This is not intended mechanisms of overlapping turrets or anything like this. For example, one Hellfire there and then grabbing this guy and like placing it right on top of it, hitting X and then Control Z. You shouldn't have two overlapping like this. But it's a really cool glitch that allows us to circumvent some of the current building restrictions and glitches that are really kind of irritating, or when you just have to try get a solution to some very complex build problems. This will allow you to overcome them. I mean, for starters, I don't know about you, but I've never been able to connect ramps to the bigger tiles at this point in time. You can only do that on the ground floor, but as soon as you go up, I haven't been able to connect ramps at all. This could be a good option to perhaps use the trick. So for instance, we would place the ramp here on the smaller tiles, which we can do, but hey, we can't do it here. But we can place the ramp down, pick it up, put it where we want. So we'll snap it onto the big tile, hit X, Control Z. So this way you can actually build in what seems to be a very logical thing to do, to build a ramp on here, whereas currently in the game you can't. Now, a lot of these issues are going to be ironed out over time, but for now, this is a really cool way to get around some of these issues. But one thing you won't be able to get around is some of these annoying finicky aspects to the ramp. When it comes to conveyor belts on ramps, it can be very, very finicky. So for example, we have this gap here, and unfortunately, most of the time, you won't be able to connect another conveyor belt directly into this area. It's very difficult to actually get this working like how you would expect it to, just because the ramps are a bit longer than the actual conveyor belts. This will all be fixed over time. The only real way to get ramps working with conveyor belts right now in this kind of manner is by using this trick where you would want to place your conveyor belt down, pick it up, place it where you would like, and then hit X and Control Z, and you can get it working. But do note, it does not work correctly on ramps. So if I get this ramp, and I've already had this conveyor belt placed down, but if I hit X, Control Z, it works, but you can see it actually says lack support. And this is only one of the rare scenarios I think that this will actually trigger. There probably is more, but let me know in the comments if there's other times where you'll find this issue, but it does not work correctly. And maybe because there is one spot not actually connected, and that's why it's saying it, which would make sense. There may be some ways around this, but that's just one issue that you might be able to run into. But outside that, this is one of the coolest tricks currently in the game, which just allows you to do some absolute crazy builds because you can defeat the collision rule. It's important to note there is another way to do the overlapping of your structures, and I'll just quickly show you how to do that. So for this to work, we're going to put down the cruiser is step one, or put down any kind of structure. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove it. We're going to grab a nuke silo, for example, and we're going to put that down as well. Then we're going to right click. We're going to pick up the nuke silo, leave it where it is, press Control Z twice and again. And because we're holding it and we right click, it's going to return it to its original position. So I'm going to right click, and that's how you can get it overlapping. So you can do this with many different things, but a common one you might see is the nuke silo with the cruiser cannon. That's what I've seen a few times. I was always wondering how people did it, but that's how you do it. So we'll just quickly go over that again. Get your structure, place that down, right click, press X to remove it, grab the structure that you want in its place it down, right click, pick up the structure, hold it where it is placed down, hit Control Z twice, then you'll see the old structure appear. It'll all have the collisions in red. All you need to do is right click, and then you'll have your actual structure in there, which you can see the Hellfire is inside the cruiser cannon. So that's the other method to do this same trick. So I hope that all makes sense. If you have any issues or you're struggling to pull it off, just let me know in the comments. I'll try answer it or put in the steps. Okay, so this next tip is kind of huge. Now, this is something I didn't discover until a lot later, and man, oh man, is it kind of incredibly powerful and very useful. And it's just so freaking simple. Now, you may know this, but I definitely didn't for quite some time. But what you can do is see how we're trying to snap these points together, and just like we can't like change it any other way because of how these connecting panels work. It gets challenging trying to connect to certain pins. We have the option to use the wheel mouse to try change some of these in certain scenarios, say like this. However, what if we just want to connect to one pin, and that pin in the middle of the ramp? Well, this is where control comes in. If you press control and you sort of muck around, we can connect to just like say one pin, but it just takes a little bit of finesse. So let me just play around. We'll get it. Okay, so I was trying to connect to the wrong pin. The one I need to connect to is here. But what we can do is we can press control while connecting and actually connect to one bloody pin. Isn't that game changing? So we can do stuff like this where we build elite wacko, platforms. And then let's just say if we wanted to put a weapon on one of these, you can do some insanely, creative stuff. Now I'm using control to attach some of these guns, but it just takes a little bit of mucking around, but you get the idea. Like, this is kind of game changing. And if you don't know this could really help when you're trying to connect things a certain way. If you're having trouble, play around with control. And another example, say if I'm trying to connect to this weird scenario, I can't. If I press control, however, I can. So this completely changes the game in terms of what you can do and how you can build. It just basically lets you offset and connect to one pin. So you can get these crazy looking structures, and you can do this with everything you connect to. We can rotate huge armored tile, like launch it out in weird directions, but some things will be restricted, and I'm sure this is somewhat intentional for sure. And there's going to be limitations on how you can actually use this, but man, oh man, this is going to be super helpful. And this can get really crazy because then you have triangles, and triangles have some of the longest distance of without needing support than any of the others. So you could get some really wacky kind of structures that just branch out and just looks kind of wild. You could do a scorpion tail. You could start getting very creative of actually almost creating, some very unusual structures. You could get like a little staircase going up vertically like this, like a little ramp that goes up the side of your base or something. But so much optionality by pressing control well. So definitely muck around with that. I'm just going to give you another quick example of how powerful this is. So say you have your pillar and you want to get your armored tile attached to the middle of this pillar. Well, how are we going to do that? So what we're going to do is we're going to hit control and scroll the wheel up once, and then we're going to scroll it down 4 times, and boom, we can actually get a pillar and have completely unique tile arrangement, which is pretty crazy because this is kind of game changing in itself of what you can do and how you can lay out your base structure by using a completely different way of connecting your upper floor to your second floor. So that's a really handy tip. We'll just quickly go over that again. You grab your tile, press control, go scroll up once, then scroll down 4 times, and boom. And when I say scroll down, I mean scroll down on your mouse wheel. So a really cool handy way of connecting a pillar to the center of an armored tile. So with the introduction of the big ramp and the 45-degree angle tile comes with some huge game-changing builds or constructions that allow you to form some absolute wild vertical, almost vertical builds like this. And there's lots of benefits to doing something like this because this is going to be perfect for later end game where the scorpions are pretty much at your door and you need your hellfires to be firing at them at the bottom of your base. But lots of applications for this. So we're just going to go over and have a quick play around with the big ramps and the ramp just so you get an idea of some of the possibilities that you can perform. So you can implement that into some of your builds. So it is pretty wild. There's a lot you can do with these ramps. So one of the really handy things you can do with ramps to start off with is just start layering them on top of each other. So then you can get these kind of vertical arrangements. And one of the things you can do is you can get very creative with how you would use these. Much easier to pull off with your smaller ramps. I was trying with the big ramp and it's just a bit harder to get working. I'm pretty sure it does, but just to give you an example there, you can easily snap your autoloader to the smaller ramp. So some cool applications for this potentially. Probably better off just using the small ramp if you need to fit it all on one level, because that should easily stay under just a typical level. So excellent little thing you can do there. Lots to play around with these ramps. And with ramps, there's so many parts where you can connect your utility tiles or whatever you're trying to connect. And this is where you can get some of the really interesting and unusual angles to build from. So some cool things you could play with there. But the main thing is that you can get them pretty much vertical, and you can do things like this where you get your armored wall and you could flick it, in front of a gun. So lots of potentials here. You could do some very interesting builds. But I just wanted to show you this to give you some idea. There is so much you can potentially do with these ramps, and with using control, you can get some really crazy structures. So it just opens the door on how you can try and navigate certain issues that you come across in your builds. And as far as I'm aware, I think this will be staying. They may change this slightly, but for the most part, this should be here to stay within reason, is my understanding at least. Something else really cool with ramps is that they have a weird collision where you can overlap a little bit of the ramp. So it's really kind of neat that you can kind of do a little bit of this. Now, it only sort of works within like this little portion here and like up to here. There's no collision. So it just allows you to do some interesting things. And some of the more impressive ones is just being able to actually utilize space a bit better by doing something like this, where you could put a sea whiz right next to your artillery, or we could do something even more elaborate, or something like this where we try to squeeze in something very unusual like a hellfire right next to the artillery. Particularly lets you build a lot closer to certain things that have these long-reaching arms. So this will work with any of artillery, but just keep in mind that it has to sort of hang off the edge of the tile, and that's when you can build on it. Otherwise, if you see here, we can't put the sea whiz on, but if we grab a big ramp, chuck it down, then we can actually utilize this space a bit better. Just another one with the quick ramps as well. If you flip them around and face them this way and sort of build a similar structure to what we've done before, we can actually some of these spring barriers and connect them onto them as well, which is really cool. So you can have a few different ways you can do it, but there'll be some interesting combinations there where you can connect your spring trap or even some of these barriers to here and really boost some of the defense. Just something to note. Thought I'd share that. Anyway, let's move on to the next tip. Now, this next tip, many of you may know, but it's something I never actually thought of or tested, is just your healing grenades. There is no projectile or real projectile for these, so you can place these underground if you wanted to, and it will still work. So just to note, you can put your healing grenades inside buildings wherever you want, and they will always work as long as you have the power. But just something important to note, I always thought they needed to be outside, but they don't. But this next tip is just to do with armored tiles. Now, it's really important to understand that when you place armored tiles down on the ground floor, all the little pins that you see here will come through. So you'll see have lots of connecting points. It all works really nicely. But however, as soon as you get to the next level, you are extremely limited in terms terms of what you can build on these big tiles. There is a few ways to overcome this lack of connections. Now you can use pillars and place them all over the ground floor, and you'll see as we've done that, we actually get a lot more different connections that come through that can then be extended again onto the next level if you wanted to. If you wanted to place another large tile on top, worth noting that your armored tiles are going to have a way different connectivity than when we compare the exact same spacing, but with utility tiles. You'll see utility tiles will have so much more flexibility, where the large tile you just struggle to have much at all without these pillars. If we remove the pillars, you will struggle to make a lot of these different connections that you would otherwise be able to do on these tiles here, because they just have a lot more pins to connect. So just something to note, in one of my other tutorials I think I touched on this, but incorrectly. I was assuming that the big tiles had the same connectivity points as the utility tiles because it was on the ground floor, where in fact it does not. So important to know that these things can be a little bit trickier to design bases around because there's so few connection points. So definitely keep an eye on that one. Now, if you have used advanced armored walls, you would know, because the patch wrecked a lot of havoc on a lot of bases, including mine, is they changed the connections and how it all works with these armored walls. So now, which is kind of nice, is that the collision is reduced and you can actually sort of cross-section your armored walls. And this is really nice because now it makes it much easier to actually build a complete armored wall of the circumference of your ground floor. Or it was very difficult. It wouldn't line up and it was an absolute nightmare. So this is really handy. Now it's a lot easier, but you can also take it a little bit further in a different way. If we connect these two walls, there's actually no collision on this middle part. So you can actually, in some instances, connect them like this as well. So there is a few different ways you could consider messing around with these walls. Now that the pins have changed, you could do some weird things like this. You can actually bring it forward. I'm pretty sure it should snap. Yeah, it snapped there. There you go. So you could do things like this too. So just some good things to note. And the other really cool thing about doing this overlapping is that it actually gets the bonus of having connecting to each other, if that makes sense. So you get the usual. So here we place it on the called armored tile, so we get a bonus. But if we intersect them together like this, we get a little bit of an additional bonus in some of these instances. So it's kind of a cool little way to overlap. So if we overlap this guy, he now gets that extra bonus. So something to note, a really good way you could build your base out. But again, a little bit of a warning to this one. If they change this again, you have to go around and reconnect all your advanced armored walls. So pay attention to this one. It may cause more pain than good, but it's worthwhile doing if you don't mind going around and replacing them all. So this next tip's really cool. It's a little bit different. A way you can get power to another area if you need to, or you don't want to use stairs. We can do this with the 406, but as you can see, there is no power going to this side of those platforms. But if we grab the big bad boy, the 406, chuck that on, you can see this is actually getting power now. So the power is transmitting up the stairs into these platforms, through the cruiser onto these platforms. So a really handy trick, just in case you did not know that, you can run power through most of the buildings. So you don't necessarily always have to have something here to get the power across. This could be used in some really technical ways. Let me know if you've got some ideas or bases where you've used this strategy. I'd really like to see some more examples of it, but really cool, handy tip to know. So this next tip is really cool. Now, as you know, you have your amp racks and you can build things on top of them. And one of those things that you can build on is your 30mm light turret. You can even build your hellfires on top of it. You just need a fair few of them. Obviously the hellfire takes up so much room anyway, but just something interesting to note that you can build your hellfire on it. You can also put the 406mm on top. It does take a lot of space, but just something to give you a little bit of extra height if you need it. Not to mention it also reinforces the bottom a lot. So it's a nice little tip there if you did want to reinforce or just get a little bit of height. But there's some other cool things we can do. So the other cool thing is we can also put our conveyor belts on these guys. So we have to run it. So you can't do it lengthways. You have to do it across. So you got to go like this, just so you know. So you can't go like build it this way. It doesn't seem to like the snapping points. It just doesn't sort of fit. But the other way works brilliantly. So using these amp racks, you can get kind of creative with your conveyor belts by just giving them a bit of extra lift. You can do some pretty funky things. And if you throw in some of the extra little big ramps there, or even just these little guys, you can get some pretty wild ideas here. But this is just an example just to show you or to give you some idea of some of the crazy stuff you could do. I mean, you could line this up better, but you could have this going out and along somewhere. You could get really, really crazy with these conveyor belts. belts, doing some nifty stuff with a mixture of these big ramps. But just something to keep in mind. I mean, additionally, you could just get rid of all this and then just flip these on here, and you could do a split of your conveyors with something similar to this, where it drops down and then goes either direction, which then you could do even something crazier and start running them along. We just need to get power to these tiles, but I just wanted to show you these are some really cool ways to just add in extra strength to your utility towers, and you can build nearly almost all buildings on them, bar a few. There are some you can't build on, it just doesn't work out or align properly, I'm pretty sure. But where you start throwing together all this, you can get some very, very crafty ways of getting your ammo boxes around your base. Another handy really tip while we're on the discussion of talking about conveyor belts is that if you get your hollow tiles, and if you grab your autoloader, even the just the generic autoloader, you even grab your normal autoloader and say throw some ammo makers or have a collection point where you'd like them to be able to grab things from, and they will grab ammo and items, pretty much anything that is grabbable or that you can hold through these hollow tiles. So let's say, for instance, we can, while having the conveyor belts on top of the amp rack, still going to work. It fits perfectly under it, so it's really nice way to do it if you need to run your conveyor belts. Normal conveyor belt has 200 health, but if you run it on these bad boys, it goes up to 6, which you can increase further with various methods. Okay, so for the first example, we have the ammo maker below. We can just run it and grab that. That will go straight through. Now you can do this with other items, so keep that in mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be just ammo. Okay, so this might be a bad example because this is going to pick it up beforehand, but I'll just see if we can get it shown. Okay, so I set this up. That was a poor example, but what I'll do is I'll just throw this under here and you'll get what I mean. It picks it up and goes straight through the hollow tiles. Now you may know that, but I just thought I would show that because it is a really handy tip and a good one just to know in case. Now in this case, it did get jammed, but do note it will go through in most scenarios. I just set this up as a really bad example. Now one thing you've probably been wondering is if your ammo workers still go without power on your conveyor belts, and yes they do. So just keep in mind, conveyor belts don't necessarily have to have power running on them to work. Now if you've ever mucked around with mechs, you know that getting them out of your base can be a bit of a pain. Now I've got this one set up which is wicked, right? They'll just come flying out. We have the ejection of the two mechs at the same time. It looks awesome, comes out of the bay, but then when you go to eject some of these other ones, they will do some very funky stuff. So okay, well this time they went forward. Sometimes they go to the side, sometimes they go left, right, who freaking knows. But what if we could control the way that they exit this building? Well, I've got a really cool thing to show you, and thank you to the people who posted this or discovered this. It's freaking awesome. And here we have a base by Hotshot, which is going to highlight this really cool trick. Now this base isn't much to look at because it's just sort of a test platform. There is another base that has incorporated this, but unfortunately I didn't hear back from the legend who built a base with this method, but we'll just quickly check this out. So if we go into edit, you will see the mighty conveyor belts in front of the mech. So how does this actually work in practice? The hope is that these eject out and go along the ramp. So let's just quickly test this out. It's going to be really neat if it is the case. And okay, there you go. It's a little bit clunky, but this looks like a pretty cool viable option of a way we could possibly direct our mechs out of our base. Really cool. I'll cover this in more detail after I've tested a bit more in another video, but I just wanted to show you this quickly. Really freaking cool. So you want to get your autoloader to reach, say, this cruiser or somewhere quite high. What you can do is we can use these material storage to raise it quite high. Like say we can go this many, and there it's connected. Now we run into the issue though, is that your autoloader won't be able to pick things up from down below. What you can do though, is you can actually use springboards to shoot your ammo up, and this will work quite nicely. There are limits to how high it goes. You can't really go much higher than, I believe it is 7 of these material crates. 6 or 7 is about the highest you can stack it that'll reach for the ammo. So just something to note. I'll just quickly give you a demonstration of it. So here you go, the ammo is there and it's going to shoot up, and then this should be able to grab it. As you can see here, it has, and it will do something funky where it hits it once and then has to hit it again. But a really neat trick. Now you can improve this by probably removing this wall. It gets a little bit clunkier if you have that there, but again, this can go pretty much from almost, I think it's 7 material crates high. So you can stack it quite high and still get it grabbing. But obviously this is a huge killer on efficiency, but it does work. So it can be something or a solution that you could use depending on your scenario that you're building. Now this also works with shells. So keep that in mind. You can use this for both ammo and shells. So we'll just have a quick look here at how it works. So here comes the artillery shell. Now it's a bit more clunkier with the artillery shells, but it does work. So we'll just have to wait for it to actually reset and hit into the air. and this is where it can be inefficient, but after a while, when it gets later and you have lots of stuff coming through, it actually works out quite well. So we'll see if it works. It should shoot up everything, and then it should grab one of them, and it should also be able to grab that artillery shell, which is now moving along the conveyor belt. But you can see how it can work because it actually hit that up and pushed it along. And I was using a system like this and it worked quite well, but you do lose a lot of efficiency. So it works, and it works quite well, but compared to just having a straight conveyor belt, you can't beat that kind of efficiency. There we go. We'll see if this works now. We've got ammo, and there it is. Oop, it works. So yeah, just giving you a good example, it does work.